Insurance. Should you have it? Or rather not? Wait, what is an insurance in the first place? Insurance is a type of risk management. Risk here refers to uncertainty. I do not know whether I'm going to get sick. Maybe I will, and I will also need a medical treatment, in which case an insurance will cover or at least partially cover the costs. But insurance is not just for medical expenses. You can find insurance types ranging from natural disasters to space rockets failures. So before we can answer our question, we need a way to properly quantify uncertainty. What is the correct way? The answer to this question is already known in mathematics. If we can specify a list of mutually exclusive and exhaustive events, for simplicity this could be two events, I will get sick and I will not get sick, then I need to assign to these events probabilities that satisfy Kolmogorov's axioms. Probabilities are quantities that range from 0 to 1 and represent increasing likelihood that the event occurs, where 0 represents impossibility and 1 represents certainty. The axioms imply that these quantities for mutually exclusive and exhaustive events must sum up to 1. In particular, this means that one of these events occurs. In our example, either I will get sick or I will not. The reason why this has to be the case is known as the Dutch book argument. If a person assigns the probabilities in a different way and act accordingly, then I can convince such a person to take a series of bets that will subject them to a sure loss. For example, assume that such a person believed that the chance of getting ill and not getting ill were both at least 2/3, in clear violation of probability axioms. Now, they should be willing to pay $2 for insurance that pays $3 in case of illness, but also pay further $2 for insurance that pays $3 in case of no illness. We can clearly see that if both options were taken, $4 will be paid as premium, but only $3 will be received, a sure loss of $1. Once we have established how we assign probabilities, we can formulate a concept of expected loss. This is simply the sum of all even probabilities multiplied with the losses associated with them. For example, if I do not take an insurance that I will get a hospital treatment requiring me to pay $10,000, while the chance of this happening is 0.1, my expected loss is the probability 0.1 multiplied by the loss 10,000 plus the probability 0.9 multiplied by no loss, which is equal to $1,000. An insurance company, knowing the risk of 0.1, will be sensible with offers to cover the cost for a premium that is higher than $1,000, say $1,100. Otherwise, they will go bankrupt in the long run. Since there are still private insurance companies around, they are charging premiums that are higher than your expected losses. Taking an insurance therefore means an added loss to your expected loss. Whoa! Wait a moment, is this your recommendation? That getting insurance is not a good deal? Well, yes. Nevertheless, you are right, this is not the whole story. But you better get ready for convex and concave functions. First, we need to admit that the probability of an individual getting sick is unknowable. If you look at a large population, then you can use past data to determine this for the group. But even you are a part of the group, you are not the group. Your age, or gender, or education, or lifestyle can make a difference, but if we keep making small and smaller groups that are just like you, well, we end up with just you. And we cannot do statistics for an individual. So when I ask the question, I do not aspire to forecast your individual fate, I wish to answer the question for people in general. Second, I might not have $10,000 at hand, only $1,100, so taking that loss is too painful for me. However, a given loss means different things to different people. In order to quantify this mathematically, we assign to the losses a utility function specific to an individual. A utility function modifies all potential losses to quantities that accurately express our feelings about them. So rather than focusing on the expected loss of $1,000, note that losses are here represented with negative numbers. I will compute the expected utility. This is simply the sum of all even probabilities multiplied with the utilities associated with given even gains or losses. We can easily identify this expected utility visually, since it lies on the line joining the two considered utilities. Since this line is strictly below the utility curve, it follows that this expected utility, which represents the case when no insurance is taken, is strictly lower than the utility of the expected loss of $1,000. And depending on the utility function, it might still be lower than the utility of insurance premium. Psychological experiments establish that most of us are strictly risk-averse, and our personal utility functions look somewhat like this, a strictly concave function. Insurance companies are there just for us. There are people who are strictly risk-seeking, their utility functions are strictly convex, and those people would not get an insurance given a choice. In some countries, for some insurance types, you don't have a choice. A risk-indifferent person would have a linear utility function. Such a person would be an emotionless creature computing expected values when making their decisions. So insurance makes sense to most of us when we face potentially painful losses, but what is a painful loss is different to different people. On the other hand, it appears not economical to insure against losses that are not painful, as we are expected to lose more with insurance than without. This is at least what the expected utility theory says, but it is just that, a theory. How is it in practice? Consider the following problem by Allais. You will make two decisions. The first is to decide between option A1, a sure win of $500,000, and option A2, which has three events. Win nothing with the probability 0.01, win $500,000 with the probability 0.89, and win $2.5 million with the probability 0.1. Make your first choice, A1 or A2. The second is to decide between option B1, which has 0.89 chance of gaining nothing, and 0.11 chance of gaining $500,000, and option B2, which has 0.9 chance to gain nothing, but 0.1 chance to gain $2.5 million. Make your second choice, B1 or B2. Most people prefer A1 to A2, they prefer certainty to avoid regret, while they at the same time prefer B2 over B1, a little chance difference but a large possible gain difference. What were your choices? But here is a problem. If, for an individual, the expected utility of A1 is higher than the expected utility of A2, and at the same time, the expected utility of B2 is higher than the expected utility of B1, then using the definition of expected utility, we will get into a trouble. A1 is a sure win of 500,000, so its expected utility is the utility of 500,000. Expected utility of A2 is the sum of utility of nothing multiplied with the probability 0.01, utility of 500,000 multiplied with the probability 0.89, and utility of 2.5 million multiplied with the probability 0.1. Expected utility of B1 is the sum of utility of nothing multiplied with the probability 0.89 and utility of 500,000 multiplied with the probability 0.11. Expected utility of B2 is the sum of utility of nothing multiplied with the probability 0.9 and utility of 2.5 million multiplied with probability 0.1. Now, we will calibrate utility so that nothing has no utility and get the following inequalities. Finally, after simple balancing, we obtain a clear contradiction. It is not possible to assign utility so that they capture true human preferences. Daniel Kahneman in his book writes about other issues that the utility theory has. How it cannot deal with human emotions, how the choice we make depends on how questions are formulated, and he comes up with a slight improvement called the prospect theory, that nevertheless still cannot capture true human behavior. For this and related work, Kahneman was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics. The book is seriously good. I just must recommend it. Look how many times I read it. It's so captivating. One thing the expected utility theory does right for most of us is to model that we are strictly risk-averse unless we face losses that are just way too big, when according to the prospect theory we became risk-seeking. Thus, for low to medium losses, paying for insurance gives us a better utility than is our expected utility. This explains some behavior we see around us. On one hand, we have poor people who do not have even appropriate health insurance, as even paying the premium is way too big a loss for them. On the other hand, many of us would irrationally insure themselves against affordable losses, while we are expected to lose more with insurance than without. We need to do the opposite. It is certainly rational to take insurance if you face painful losses that can take you out of the business. Rich companies still insure their satellites launch on boards of space rockets, as getting one exploded would be just too painful a loss for the company. But we need to also realize that when we can afford to take a loss, it is not economical to insure against it. A smart rich company owner would not take a health insurance. I do not need to take an insurance against the loss of my phone, because I can easily buy a new one, and if I take an insurance I expect to lose more than if I do not take it. But whether this is a painful loss depends on who we are talking about. A teenager who just used all their savings for a phone will see this differently, and taking an insurance will give them a better utility. So if you face a potential loss that can take you out of business, try not to be risk-seeking and take an insurance. If you can afford the loss, do not be risk-averse and say no to insurance.